something, so hopefully it works. This time, cool. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome new people. Um Today we're going to be talking about books 3 and 4 of the Confessions. Um the Confessions reads like an autobiography. And in chapters 1 and 2 it was talking about his early adolescence and then his infancy. And in book 3 it starts at around when he's maybe early 20s or like his late teens. Are we starting or waiting? I started it. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so this book 3 starts off in his late teens. Um Back then in ancient times, it was around this age that you could like it was at around this age that you were leaving off to college, right? It would be like moving out of your house, so when you start to gain some independence. And this is what was going on with Augustine. He was leaving the house. He made it to Carthage, um, a city a city away from home. He finally moved out from his mother's place. And Carthage at the time, he describes it not like this peaceful or like a pious city, but a city full of desires, a city like Vegas basically, where there's drink and there's women and it's college. Uh it's like freshman year. There's so many new things he wants to try, there's so many new people he wants to meet. Drinking, women, all that type of stuff. And that's where like he's kind of plopped in Carthage. He loves loving things. That's like a point he wants to make very early on in that book. He doesn't love something, but he loves loving. He's like in love with loving things. Um and he kind of talks a little bit about the theater and what role this love of loving plays in the theater and in yeah, in like movies or plays or anything he goes to watch. Uh he notes that at this that people go and they watch these movies in order to feel scared, in order to feel love or feel sadness, but they wouldn't want these things that they're seeing on the big screen or at the play, like on the stage, to be happening to them in real life, and it's a little bit odd for him. He's questioning why people love being tortured, like by having to watch a horror movie or a really sad play. Um, so he's grappling with that, and it's this type of like pent up release that you feel when you watch these plays. It's like relieving stress almost. Then he notices though that it's not solving any issues. It's just like releasing stress, but it's not solving the core issue that's like plaguing people, I guess. Then he talks a little bit about Cicero. He decides he's starting to move in a different direction, right? So where everything was about partying and like having a good time and loving things and desires, he starts to move a little bit towards something else when he picks up the book Hortensius by Cicero. And he decides at this point, after reading Hortensius, which unfortunately we don't have, we only have fragments of it, it's been lost to history. But he decides to read this book, and then from that point on, he says, okay, I want my life to be one of wisdom. I want to seek truth and seek wisdom. That's what's most important, not seeking desires and all that stuff. So he tries to make this shift in his life, but he's still a little bit misguided, still lost, still naive, still proud. He picks up the Bible and he reads it because maybe he thinks that he can get some truths out of the Bible. And he reads it and he puts it down and he's like, this is just like childish stuff. It's not written very eloquently. It's not written like the works of Cicero or the high class, the very fancy stuff we're talking about in my classes. It's just like child's play and like little stories. This is dumb. He puts it down, doesn't care about it. He wants answers. So he goes over to some Manicheans. The Manicheans, they were this sect at the time, a group of strong believers in a lot of like really unpopular things. They had a lot of differing beliefs. One of their big ones was they were huge dualists, right? So they believed that in the world there was constantly this war between good and evil, like two things always clashing against each other. An equally powerful evil as to an equally powerful good, always kind of butting heads against each other. This like yin yang in the universe. Um, and that God was not all powerful in this case, right? They solved their problem of they solved the problem of evil by removing the omnipotence of God. They also believed things like that everything that was material, everything that was flesh was evil, and everything that was spirit was good. So there was that like dichotomy to man, that the spirit was good, but the meat, the flesh was evil. They thought that during this big battle in the sky, there was little shards that kind of like would float down from this battle and enter people and their bodies. And in that way, these little shards or these little bits would be like the divine parts of the human, or like the magical good parts of the human. It was kind of, I heard a really funny analogy, and it's kind of like if you think about Star Wars, or if you guys know anything about Star Wars, it's like the midichlorians in all the Jedi could be seen as these like shards. Um, so like yeah, people with high midichlorian counts would be very very pious, or like very very godly almost, and their prophet Manny was the third coming of God, like the embodiment with tons of these shards of goodness. So he's with the Manicheans for a while. He teaches in their schools for about 9 years. Um, and he's teaching rhetoric, so like the art of persuasion and all that stuff. And at this point, he's flirting with Manichaeanism. He's not completely satisfied with what the Bible has to offer. He's trying to find truths, but his what's always getting in the way is his pride. Um, he's incredibly intelligent, but he's not approaching the Bible with the type of humility that should be, with which it should be approached, as he like notes. That at this point in time he was very very proud. In the fourth book, he kind of talks a little bit about how he takes a mistress, he has an illegitimate child, and one super scarring or marking turning point in his life is the death of his best friend, and this like shakes him to his core. His friend, who he like was basically his brother, ends up passing away from an illness, and it just like destroys Augustine. And at this point, Augustine starts to think or like realize, wow, I was so attached to this friend. Um, now that he's lost, like I feel completely empty. A part of me died. And then he goes to reason that he wasn't loving his friend in God. He was just loving his friend in himself, and that he had to get his priorities a little bit straight. Um, he says he was tired of living but terrified of dying at this point. And that's basically the type of topics or things that he was talking about. I won't say any more. But I'm sure I missed a bunch. And yeah, that was a little small introduction to books 3 and 4 of the Confessions. What did you guys think about it, if you read it? Cade, I want to hear what you have to say.
It's a good book. I don't know. I like the point about how he was in love with loving. I think it's a issue of like loving the idea of a person rather than the person themselves.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that I resonate with that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point to analyze, right? It's the very act of caring about something, about being invested. Um, not even with importance, right? Just the sheer action of it, which I think is pretty prevalent, even as society develops. I don't know if any of you have seen something like Cyberpunk Edge Runners, right? Where it's just all of these emotions running wild without any actual purpose behind them. It's just the sheer desire of something. Like it's kind of like I guess like energy, right? Energy without any direction.
Yeah, it's just the desire to desire. That's what he likes. It's like a hopeless romantic, like a chicken running with his head cut off, just like always trying to engage in desire, but never properly loving something for itself. Talks a lot about death too, I think, in the fourth book, which was kind of interesting. He says he was scared of dying. Are any of you guys scared of dying?
Yeah.
The casual question.
I think we're scared of a painful death, but I don't know if it's right to say that we're actually scared of death. I think we might be scared of the unknowns of the unknowing, like of what we don't know almost, because I feel like that's kind of necessary in being human. A lot of times we are scared of what we don't know.
I agree with Ori in that point. It's kind of like a similar to H.P. Lovecraft's work, right? Where it's the fear of the unknown. We're as humans, and we like a finale that feels satisfying. So just the unknown of whether death is truly the end, or as many religions prescribe to, that death is a midpoint to something else, is what we're afraid of.
I think what would be most scary, it's not like the unknown part. It's the possibility of non-existence. Just simply like not existing is maybe what scares people.
Yeah, I'm pretty terrified of death and that.
One thing I always think about
I
is
mean,
like,
the fear comes.
oh, sorry, go for it.
I'll just say that the fear kind of not existing comes from a, if you're a purely materialist, like, or naturalist type view,
What does that mean?
Well, just like you don't believe there's anything after,
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
I kind of view that as a weird, like, almost contradiction, right? Because of the way I see it, at least, is if you're some kind of believer in a higher power, like let's say like Christianity, then you believe if you're a righteous person, you will ascend to heaven. But if you're a materialist, then you believe there's nothing but the physical. If you think you're nothing more than flesh and blood and bone, then eventually you will die, but you will continue in its existence through a physical means, right? Your body will turn to it will rot and then return to dirt and then be reutilized for something else.
I mean, I don't think that necessarily is taken away by a materialist or by an immaterialist standpoint, right? Like the materialist isn't going to say that your body's not going to turn to fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. Think more so the contention that the materialist would have from an idealist is like, is there something beyond, right? Like, is consciousness something, or like, is the soul something that kind of stays even though your body is no more? I know, considering that Augustine takes a lot, almost basically is the Plato of medieval. When it comes to the soul, like Plato, like defining it as, or life, he kind of says that almost like a combination of body and soul. Like when there is a soul within a body, the body can be said to be living. So when the soul and the body diffuse and depart from one another, then the body can be said to be dead. And so if we kind of take it like that, it seems like, how do I say this? It seems like the materialist cannot account for the difference between life and death. So I was thinking like more so consciousness and soul would have to be a big difference for the materialist.
That's kind of what I was pointing to. Like, if you just believe purely material world is the only thing that exists, and you're gonna have trouble reconciling not existing.
I don't think so, because like the one, like, pretend you're a materialist. Everything is just a product of like some physical stuff going on. Your soul or your awareness is some sort of like either illusion or emergent property of these like physical things. You can think about before you were born. It's like you can't, but like in some way you kind of can, and maybe that's what.
How can you?
It's just like non-existent.
In what way?
Huh? Because there was nothing.
How can you think of what is not?
What is
if
not?
it was not?
You can think of the idea of nothing as a thing, right?
Well,
even though it's not a thing, but you can think of it as a thing. And we can
Thinking
get
about
close.
it, I don't think it's quite the same as experiencing it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever possible to actually think about nothing, because when you think about nothing, it's more so you think of a blank space because you don't know what nothing actually is.
Well, you're just
Because
not
nothing
thinking.
is not a
Yeah.
thing, and therefore it's. I don't think so. If you think of nothing, then you are inherently thinking. There's no, like, when you're taking this more like, when you were truly trying to speak of nothing, it's impossible. I mean, you can do something called not speaking,
Mhm.
but you can't speak of nothing. And I think we're making like a category mistake here in the way that we're using not and nothing.
Well, you're just
Um,
negating the existence of anything. In the same way, like you can never draw a square. We can still talk about squares and kind of like get close to understanding what a square might be. Same thing with nothing. We
I
can't fully
guess,
we can't wrap our heads around nothing, but we can get close and kind of like understand like it's the absence of stuff or experience.
I think, uh, we're kind of misunderstanding the notion of not and nothing, but because I think the way that we're looking at nothing is something that still is, and that might be a bit problematic, depending on how you view it. Um,
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page. I'm not saying that we can imagine nothing.
okay.
Right? I'm just saying we can get close to like analogizing what it might be for there to be nothing. In the same way we can like
I see.
analogize or kind of like maybe kind of wrap our heads around a square or like how what a square is. It's like just like yeah, we can get close. Think about before you were born. You can't, but you can kind of imagine that it's just lack of experience, right? In a way.
Let's see.
Hi Xanax Fangs. Welcome back. It's a pretty hardcore name.
I mean, both you guys, Chris and Ori, you guys don't believe in God, I assume.
Agnostic. I don't
Do
affirm
you
or
believe in a soul or
I
something
don't
that
I
exists
don't know.
after you die?
I don't have a strong opinion or belief. I don't know.
Well, how about you, Ori? I guess that's a no. I don't know.
I'm sure you do, Cade. You believe in a soul?
Well, yeah, I think that comes with being a Christian,
Yeah.
but
I'm interested. How does it interact with the body? There's a lot of different questions, and the Manicheans had their funky answers to that. But for you,
I don't know. I think it could be. I have a few theories of what it could be. One of my favorite ones was that. Actually, I don't even know if this was a favorite one. It's not as sound, but I just liked how it sounded. It was when you do something, right? What you did happened no matter what, right? Like even if everything fades away, what you did still happened. There's like an immortality aspect to the things that you do, if that makes sense. So even if everything fades away, it still happened.
hmm
And that makes me think there's something eternal about a human being and just about life itself, really, or existence.
yeah, in that we can cause things.
And that those things happened. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it's undeniable that it happened, I guess, unless you're a relativist or something. I don't know. You'd have to take a interesting stance,
yeah.
but
Dependent on time a
I
little bit though. Then.
sure. Even if time ceases to exist, the things still happen, though, right?
Yeah.
I guess
Well.
I should probably define what I mean by happen. But
Yeah. Something
go full
happening gets
Jordan
really tricky.
Peterson.
Yeah. But
What do you
later
mean
on,
happen?
yeah, later on, Augustine will start talking about like his presentism. He's kind of like B theory of time, or his proto B theory of time, which is a really cool way to look at it.
I know Kierkegaard has his own distinction, which is kind of weird. where he says a combination of like mind, body, and soul is what makes a human being a spirit, or gives us the existential dimension. But I don't really know exactly what he meant by soul. That was from the Sickness Unto Death.
Yeah.
He just said more it's a synthesis. I don't know. It's a weird topic to like talk about.
It's
I
hard
don't really
to
know
talk
how to
about.
define it. Yeah. Did Ori leave or?
Don't know. Maybe he's making a sandwich or something.
I wanted to hear his opinion because he's the Plato guy.
The Plato guy, yeah.
I mean, how do you reconcile not being sure if one exists? Like, how does that psychologically make you feel, you know?
Wait, not being sure what exists?
If a soul exists.
Oh. That's a great question. It does make me uneasy. But I think what matters at the end of the day is that it feels like I would have a soul or this like autonomous unity to myself. Like it feels that way, and that's good enough for me. Um, yeah, just the fact that it feels like I kind of have a soul is enough consolation to ward off the epistemic question of do I have a soul? So
I was
even
about
if
to
it's just an
say,
illusion,
you're okay without the epistemic certainty. You're just
yeah,
chilling either way.
I guess I'm chilling. Well, every now and then everyone's gonna have an existential crisis, but most days
Yeah.
I'm fine with just
Most days I'm fine.
most days I'm not ripping my hair out.
I mean, does anyone else want to comment on their perspective of what a soul is, or if we even have one? I don't even know who else is here because I'm playing a game at the same time I'm talking.
Harold, do you think we got souls?
I'm kind of just listening. I'm kind of like zoning in and out because I'm like playing guitar, but I am enjoying it. I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't want to waste everyone's time by yapping on about like ideas of a soul because I feel like I'd like have so little to say about it that I'd be better off just not saying anything. Especially with Cade here, who seems to kind of know his stuff around like theology and you know, like a Christian perspective.
I think that a soul might be related to, I believe it's Aristotle, right? He made the difference between man and animal. How man's ability to rationalize makes them separate from them. That would be my argument of why
Yeah,
humans have soul and against and not animals. Because there's
Kierkegaard made
something
a similar argument there too, which is kind of
yeah,
like,
that there's something separate from the instincts, right? That there's rationale that moves us.
so the ability to subvert our instincts and make rational decisions. Kind of.
It would be the evidence of the soul in my mind.
Kierkegaard was the existential dimension. Like cows and stuff aren't really having existential crises out here, you know.
Right.
Like maybe dogs are. I don't know. I don't know if they're quite there, but
There was that man, it was a supernatural occurrence essentially where there was this bridge and for no reason dogs would just jump off the bridge and kill themselves.
I heard about that, yeah.
what?
And yeah, it's so bizarre.
In England, it
Like
was like
they
this
would
weird thing.
yeah, they would go out of their way to just do it. And
So
there was never an
weird.
explanation. Some people would try to think it might have been like something that messed with their senses that we cannot perceive.
Maybe. That's
Yeah.
kind of weird.
But I think that would either kind of serve for or against it, right? Either they're conscious and, you know, I guess soul just isn't a thing, and they just decide to kill themselves, which go against their primal instincts, or their instincts are working against their self-preservation by luring them into their own demise, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't thought about that in a while. There's also a lot of cases of dolphins, for example, committing suicide, just not going up for water if they're incredibly depressed in their
Yeah.
cages or in their tanks. So they're doing
So maybe
some
they have a soul.
yeah, so maybe they have some sort of soul because they're yeah.
The same thing with great white sharks too. For some reason, we just can't hold one in a zoo or an aquarium because they'll just die.
Yeah.
Very, very bizarre stuff.
I would be of the opinion that if we have souls, animals must also have souls. I don't see a big difference between like a distinction between man and animal. Very
Right.
much.
Yeah, because man is still animal, right? It's just not the same creature as, let's say, dogs or dolphins.
Yeah, we just got a really big
Yeah.
frontal lobe. That's basically it.
Yeah.
We are Dasein, the being who for being is a question.
Gosh, how do you form this thing?
I don't know, any other topics from Confessions that we want to dive into?
From Confessions. I guess we can talk about I really liked and I really liked the focus on his mom. His mom was like this beacon that God was constantly and always speaking through. And he just wasn't understanding it. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of people and kids. It's like your parents raise you as best they can, trying to guide you or hoping for you to seek out things of like meaning in the world, not of like instant pleasures, of like finding purpose in the world, and they hope that for you. But then at one point they just need to like let go and be very, very patient and hope that you will heed their advice at one point or another, like throwing a boomerang and then just hoping it comes back. And that's what she was doing with Augustine. And I can't help but feel that that's a really common feeling growing up that people have. They leave their parents kind of and their advice and their guidance, and then as they get older, they might come back. Made me want to call my mom.
I mean, Christians often use like God, like the metaphor of God as like a father, a parent, or whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of it is
Which-
saying like he gives you all these signs and he gives you all this. You just have to like listen, basically. So
Right. It's kind of like the idea that if you aren't willing to listen to your paternal figures, right? You don't adhere to their tutelage and their advice, their knowledge of the world, then how can you be expected to do so of God, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and too, God, he's supposed to represent like unconditional love, and that's kind of what like a parent is like at least supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Like your kid isn't transactional, hopefully, right? Like, and you're not really like friends because if they're a baby, they're not really like. I guess you can hang out, but I don't know. It's not quite the same as hang out with your buddies.
Yeah.
So
This actually kind of, by any chance, have any of you read The Road by McCarthy?
No. Enlighten me.
So in the road, it's like a post-apocalyptic story, right? It's a son and a father go through the apocalypse trying to go, I believe it was south to the USA because it's getting colder. That isn't really relevant, but one of the quotes that really sticks to me is that, and it goes something around the lines of, it refers to when the father's son was born, and the father said that if the child was not the voice of God, then God never spoke. And I think that
Wait,
that's pretty
can you say
profound.
that again, please?
The father, it said, if the son was not the voice of God, then God never spoke.
Oh. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think last time we were talking about, yeah, Cade. Last time it was me and Henry and Bruno and Cade. We were talking about how God speaks, but you need to be like listening, basically. He can speak and you can just ignore it. And that's what Augustine was doing during this time of his life. Like God was speaking and working behind the scenes, but he just wasn't accepting or paying attention to these things. And then we were talking about how it can get a little tricky if you're trying to listen for God. I feel like you might end up misattributing things to godly uh, interventions or like godly stuff, and just like coincidental random stuff. I remember like one time my friend whose mom is like super religious, she was like praying that his luggage would get safe, would make it to where were we going? Would make it to Asia safely. And then it got there safely, and she's like, "Oh, thank you. I knew God was doing that for you. Like I knew God was playing his hand. He was doing some divine intervention for your luggage to show up." I feel like I'm afraid of ever attributing coincidence to godly intervention, whereas some people just aren't.
I mean, it could be both, right? Both coincidence and
Coincidence and divine
yeah.
intervention? How?
Well, just like maybe not coincidence, because I think everything has a causal chain, at least in this particular case.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
you wanted to go to a place, so it. I don't know if I really believe in coincidence, but I don't know. I just, for me, I wouldn't do that personally. Let's just say that that's a little much, kind of a little silly. But I don't know if God is, if you, when you're a really devout Christian, God is in every corner of your life, including the mundane. So I don't know. I wouldn't do that personally, like I said, but still, it's kind of funny.
Or there was one story
Nation of
oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask Cade, what denomination of Christianity is he?
I guess technically non-denominational, but I don't know. I have a lot of admiration for different denominations for different reasons. But I guess that should be a caveat in some ways, right? I'm not coming from a Catholic or a, certain type of perspective.
But definitely not
So my
Manichean.
perspective can be different. Yeah, I think that died a long time ago. That did not last long.
Yeah, it stopped at around the 6th century. It's because, I mean, Manny the prophet, he considered himself the third Jesus Christ. I mean, or the if Jesus was the second coming of God, or like God embodied, Manny was the third version of that. How do
Well,
people?
and he also was like Buddha and Christ and many other things all combined together.
Yeah.
So they had like a statue of like Buddha, Christ, and like some other like all put together in one statue.
That's so
Just
weird.
kind of wild to look at.
Yeah. Another issue with Manichaeism is that so they claim that they were dualists, right? That people had a spirit and a body, and that the material was evil and that the spirit was good. But whenever Augustine would try and get answers as to, okay, like what does it mean for something to be a spirit? What is, like, explain this to me. What is it? They would always say things like, "Oh, it's like mist." But mist is material. Okay, well, it's not like mist then. Maybe it's like wind. Well, like, yeah, you can't see wind, but wind is also a type of material. Anytime they were trying to explain the spirit, they would invoke material things. So that's why some people ended up actually think that the Manicheans were like fake dualists, and really they were just materialists.
Hmm.
Crazy belief.
I wish I was more well read on Manichaeism. All I remember too is they did not harvest food or something because they believed like they weren't supposed to kill anything, including plants. So they
Yeah,
had to import food.
yeah. So the way the Manicheans were like structured is that they had the elders or the leaders, and then the hearers or the juniors. And Augustine was this junior, or like this like servant, almost like second tier, lower down Manichean. And they thought that, yeah, killing anything was evil and they shouldn't do it. So what they would have is the hearers, they would go out and kill things or harvest plants and then feed them to the elders, and that way the elders wouldn't have to deal with like being evil or being bad. Um, and then they would eat figs because figs had a lot of like these like special shards of like divinity in them, and then they would consume them and become more godly or something like that. Yeah, but they worked in
Hmm.
like a two-tier system. The elders and then like the bitches. And they do all the hard work. They were allowed to get married and stuff. And the elders, they couldn't do anything like that.
Yeah.
That sounds like Waco.
Kinda.
Sounds like the server.
Yeah.
No. Um, I don't know. They could be duelists, they could not be. I have no idea. I should read more. I mean, maybe they had like a panentheism or something rather than straight, theism. Kind of like somewhere in between. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But they had the intellectual answers, Augustine would say. Like if I don't like a Thrasymachus or like a sophist, any type of sophist, someone who was really good at speaking and really, really smart, that's who the Manicheans were. And since Augustine was like so obsessed with like this intellectual life and like teaching and just being a smarty pants, he gravitated towards them because they seemed to have certain answers that were like intellectual. But then when he would probe Faustus, one of the elders, or Mani, they would just give him like crappy answers and unsatisfying answers, answers that were in the Bible, that he didn't pick up on.
Yeah, I think that sophists, a big thing with them that Augustine took up, almost similar, very like basically very similar to Plato, is that I mean he thought they were almost the exact same thing that Plato thought, just more so in a different divine way, or almost indivine is probably the word that he would use, where I mean Plato's big critique of books is that they can't talk back to you, that you can't really have a conversation with a book. You can have a conversation with the authors. You ask a book a question, right? It's gonna say the same thing over and over again. Um, and that's why philosophy and probably Augustine would say even theology really occurs within dialogue, right? That's why it seems like Augustine wrote. Some of his writings were dialogues. And the sophists, they're these things that basically create what looks right when it clearly isn't. So anybody who's not parsing through it isn't going to know what a I guess whether or not what they're saying is actually fake, what is actually because it's hard to tell. You need this kind of training in debate, right? You need to be able to understand that sophists they imitate an expertise, right? It's not that they are experts in refutation and dialectic, they imitate expertise in refutation. They the thing is though, they also don't know what they're talking about. They just sound like they know what they're talking about, and they make this copy of something almost that appears similar to what they're copying, but because it's a copy, it's not. They don't know actually what they're talking about. It's this production of false speech in a very mechanical and systematic way. And I think there's a cool like etymological fact with sophists, right? It sounds like the word sophos, I think, and Sophia, which is wisdom in Greek, but it's not. It's an imitation of it. So it's cool that it comes from sophist, Sophia. Why does it sound so much like wisdom when they have none?
They're the wise guys.
Precisely.
And it only took Augustine 9 years to realize they didn't know what they were talking about.
Hey, that's shorter than most people.
True. Fair. Yeah.
Or I was asking too about the soul. Like, do you believe in the soul? That humans have one?
I don't know. I always like when I take Plato, I read the soul more so as the mind and like his consciousness. Because I don't know, maybe that won't work with some of his writings, but to me, it's really hard to say. I think that there has to be like we can't just reduce consciousness to physical because it seems like there is something aphysical about it. But I think it works for 99% of spots where people say the soul if you just substitute the mind. As long as you interpret it in a little bit more rigorously. Obviously, it's not going to look too well on face value in some places. But I know that's definitely a hard one. Probably one better for if you interpret it as the mind rather than the soul. I'll have to pass this on to our neuroscientist, Chris.
I mean, yeah, we could talk about like Phil of Mind then a bit, I guess, or something.
Yeah, I mean, you get
I don't really
you
know
start
how
getting
to.
into it. Yeah. Like there's this when I think of the soul, I think of like a driver, a first mover, something that can start an action, a behavior, or anything like that. That like really, really internal the first thing in us. Like if our soul wants to do something, that it enables us to do that thing. And there have been a
You're
lot of
saying
cool.
like
Oh, sorry, go for it.
I was gonna say, is it like your unmoved mover of the body then?
It's like the will, like the unmoved mover, the will, like the thing that can do stuff without having been caused to do stuff. You know. And there's these really cool experiments that they've been doing now, where they try and pin down what this first mover thing is. And one of them was that like they put you in front of a computer, basically, and they ask you, okay, we want you to press the button right in front of you. And people will try and press the button, but the thing is that they have caps recording their motor cortex and just different spots of the brain, and the people can read and figure out when they're gonna press the button before the participant is aware that they even wanted to press the button. So there's this like layer of us that we're not ever aware of. The awareness is a type of post hoc creation of this little homunculus, if you want to call it, this little dude in there that's choosing to press the button, which I think is really cool.
The unconscious mind, right?
The unconscious
That
mind,
we're
yeah,
getting to.
I was thinking more inside out.
kind of.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I'm sure you probably are familiar with like Jung and Freud. The ego is often not seen as the totality of a person, which is often the thing we call I, the conscious part of us. There's a lot more to a human being than just that.
Yeah.
I believe it.
But it's this little guy that we're not aware of. Everything that comes
I mean,
afterwards, we just make up a story to like go along with it.
you just understand our like unconscious functions almost. In that case, kind of tell our brain almost in a way, hey, pass this on to the conscious.
Mhm.
Like, do you think we're like constantly unconsciously thinking about things, and then when a thought actually pops up into our head, it's like the unconscious kind of passing it on to say like, hey,
Kind
our
of.
mind wants to think of this. Like it kind of takes priority over other unconscious thoughts, because like I'll still be thinking of things. I'll still be thinking of things even when I'm like doing things unconsciously, right? Like I need to think about walking, but there are other things that I'm thinking about while walking that kind of take priority over that, right?
That's more the default mode network, which is just like a generation of ideas.
Well, okay, maybe walking isn't the best example, but
Well, kind of. I mean, that's part of what the unconscious does. I think Chris is more, I think, certified than I am to speak on that.
I mean, yeah, the way I imagine it is that in our minds there are just tons of like little modules, and they're always all competing to get their heads above the water, and the water being the unconscious, the stuff we're not or awareness, let's call it. So like things are always fighting between each other, and then if something kind of wins out, it makes its way to our awareness, and then we can be aware of it, and we have a narrative, and we're conscious of that thing. But there's still tons of other modules going off, like the humming of my refrigerator, or the temperature of the room. I need to like hone in my perception to be aware of those things, but they're always all being processed at the same time. They're all being processed in parallel. We're just not aware of them. And awareness is really cool because it comes after the fact that something was thought. So it's only after the processing of these modules has occurred that we're aware of it. If you touch something hot and I ask you why you removed your hand, you removed your hand before you even understood or can come up with a reason to say, oh, it's because it was hot. But you still tell yourself I
Have
removed my
you
hand because it was hot.
read Merleau-Ponty at all? Because this sounds exactly like straight out from his book,
Say that again?
Phenomenology of Perception. Have you read Maurice Merleau-Ponty?
I don't think so. I don't know.
He's a phenomenologist that he did fill up mind in response to Descartes.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard of 4E cognitive science. Merleau-Ponty basically inspired that completely. The embedded, enacted, was it embedded, enacted, extended, and something else? Oh, embodied. Sorry, embodied, embedded, enacted, extended. Where basically, 4E cognitive science is super cool because it implies cognition exists outside of the body completely, and that the mind and body aren't really separate. Also, it rejects dualism. But
Hold on, how does it reject dualism if it separates cognition from the body?
no, sorry, I meant to say it doesn't. What it does is it makes cognition not just a part of the body, but also part of the world, and also part of here. Let me send a definition of 4E cog sci, maybe, because I am not the best at explaining it. But Chris, are you aware of it or no?
4E cog sci? Probably. But 4E, like, nothing's coming to mind. Let me Google it, and then maybe I'll be refreshed. 4E.
Yeah.
Chat GPT it even.
That's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna have ChatGPT explain it like very simply, because
That the
I am
body and its
not.
environment play a causal role. Yeah, there's always a bottom-up and top-down relationship between cognition and action, I think.
Well, the most interesting one to me was extended, that your mind isn't just in your head, that extends to objects around you.
Yeah, like Otto's notebook, that whole thought experiment.
Here, that's
Wouldn't
ChatGPT.
that kind of take from Kant too? Because Kant kind of says that all our objects are filtered through our mind. We're only perceiving things as our mind allows us to perceive, right? We're not perceiving the things
It
as they
didn't
are.
start with him, if I remember correctly. It went from Kant, and then it went to Husserl, and then Husserl had a transcendent that he was trying to combine essence with existence, and then Ponty did that, and then we get cognitive science. So it does kind of come from Kant, if I remember correctly.
Because like that extended really sounds like the Kantian concept of, I guess, the categories, right? Like any object that you perceive has to be able to be perceived through these categories. Think of it like as a filter, right? I don't know why they call it categories. I do, but it's just weird why they decided to call it categories. But basically, you only you can only understand things through these categories. It's impossible to understand it in any other way, just because of how your mind works. And because of that, it makes it so like that it would allow extended cognition to be understandable, right? It's not necessarily I don't know, maybe you can use like a metaphor using like psychedelics. Like obviously it doesn't work exactly like this, but metaphorically, like you can say that you're like taking psychedelics might kind of tear down the filter a little bit, and you start seeing things in a different way. If that filter wasn't there.
If I'm understanding you properly, are you saying that the categories can be seen as a vehicle for cognition, for extended cognition? like a medium.
Yeah,
which-
yeah, kind of. It's like the filter, the categories, is what allows the thing in itself to be perceived by our mind as a thing in appearance. We're never able to fully capture the thing in itself because it always travels through the filter.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, this does fit with extended, I think, mostly, because extended also does imply that you can never be fully captured, nor the thing that you are, grasping could ever be fully captured.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wanted Chris's opinion on 4E cognitive science because you mentioned that you did Phil of Mind, so I would be surprised if you haven't heard of this.
We're doing a lot of from dualism to physicalism and everything in between. So type physicalism, token physicalism, non-reductive physicalism, and all of those stuff. So, but 4E is always in the background, right? There's a lot of like really cool models for how they account for mental phenomenon or mental states is a really big thing. How we account for mental states if everything is physical. Some on supersedence, some things believe it supersedes like on top. Some people believe it's just some sort of emergent thing. Yeah, but it's a lot of cool stuff. I don't know. I'm still tempted, for argument's sake, argumentatively, like to err on the side of non-reductive physicalism or just flat out physicalism. Yeah.
So you don't want to reduce anything to the physical, or you do?
That some things can't be perfectly reduced to physical things, right? So for example, like the idea of pain, it has there's a property of pain that cannot be completely pointed at to the brain. It's like that experience of it. But
Well, too, like pain doesn't always come to consciousness too. Like you can have moments where you like cut yourself and you won't even notice you're in pain till later.
Yeah, until you look at it, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
But I don't know if that's what you're getting at, Chris, but
but the pain, any type of mental state requires a physical state, right? There cannot be pain without those like neural activations going on, but there can be those neural
Absolutely.
activations without the pain going on, right?
Right. I mean, and you see that with those people who are quite literally like can't feel pain.
Those are for different reasons, I think. That's just because they have a lesion in in their motor cortex.
this is partly why I like 4E is because it breaks down the dualism. Like there is no act that doesn't have the physicality and the like your body is a vehicle for like living in the world. Like you can't perceive without it. Sorry, I'm in like the middle of a game. I'm trying to
Your brain's going overdrive right now.
yeah, I'm in a big fight. I don't know. I wondered your opinion on it since you said you were into that.
I don't know if I fully subscribe to it, but it's attractive.
Well, my favorite part is actually a scientific backing. It's one of the most credible like fields. Like people have actually made advances because of 4E cog sci. So, beyond the dualist perspective. I know it's a pretty new field too, though. So I don't know, but I like Merleau-Ponty, if you couldn't tell, and that's like why I like it so much.
Yeah. There's a lot of issues with causation as well when we're talking about philosophy of mind. Because you'd need a mental state to cause a physical thing to happen if you want to.
Well, the argument is that these are interwoven. There is no real subject-object dichotomy. They're two poles of one world, basically, is the idea.
Yeah.
Well, what about like unconscious reactions? Does that still have a mental state, or is a mental state only something that you can actually
I would say that's still you.
feel?
And
Well, no,
that's
it's still you, but is it a mental state if it's unconscious?
I would say so. I don't know what Chris thinks about that, but I think so.
Yeah. again, I'm
I think most of our mental states are unconscious. Really, like I didn't choose to be hungry, right? It just happens to me.
but
Well,
you're
yeah, but you can still feel being hungry, right? Once once you're consciously aware of it is once I thought it becomes a mental state. At least using I forget exactly whose theory of mental states it was, but it has to be this kind of thing that you're aware of mentally for it to be a mental state of some sort. And obviously,
Well-
that's the hard thing about mental states is that they're almost undefinable.
Well, like for example, I think depression is something you're not really consciously fully aware of. I think part of that is just unconscious.
You
It's
don't
kind of
think you're
like
consciously aware of being sad?
I think you
depression, not
you
sadness.
can become
Right.
consciously aware of being sad,
You can.
but it's in the background a lot of the time and you're not aware of it, but it's still
Yeah, that's what I'm
interesting.
saying. Like it's
Yeah.
mostly I mean, you things get brought to consciousness because you need to deal with it. That's kind of like part of what the unconscious mind does. Like, hey, you should probably pay attention to this.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I got it. Otherwise, I'll take care of it. But if you really, if I'm bleeding now, it's probably gonna say, okay, you should look at that and probably try to find help, right?
I
But
see. Yeah,
things
well,
are
that's why I
brought to
felt
consciousness during emergency, usually, like stuff like that.
good thing I have you guys.
Good thing. I think this Discord server might have brought some emergency, but
Well, do we you want to go back to Augustine, or are we having fun talking about mine?
A little digression there. On to Augustine. What more did you guys like about books 3 and 4? I like at the beginning when he's talking about how we almost like to suffer in a way through watching horror movies or through watching dramatic plays or sad plays. We subject ourselves to this type of pain. Why do you think we subject ourselves to these types of pains? Why do we like it?
humans are.
I mean, maybe you could say it's because it's like this. You still feel like you're in control, so you're feeling an emotion that you might not want to feel. If you weren't able to control it, right? That's like why we're not necessarily attracted to being in fear or in a sad place, right? We don't want to feel blue, but if you can control, like, hey, I don't want to feel sad for a long time, I can just turn off this movie or something, like, at least we're in control, so we can kind of like, it's like taste testing an emotion, you know what I mean? And it almost gives us like a sense of control over our emotions. And I haven't really thought this out, but I think that's where I would start with it, right?
But it's like I get what you're saying, but when you're watching a very, very sad movie, you start crying and you can't, sometimes you just can't control these tears or these feelings. Maybe is it the possible danger or repercussions that come with these feelings that you're trying to avoid if they're fake or
I
displayed
guess
versus
maybe it's more so that you're not sad about something that happened to you. You're more so sad about something that you witnessed, right? And something that you can tell it's an artificial sadness, right? It wasn't produced by something real. It was more so like think Baudrillard's like hyper realistic, like hyper real moment, right? It's this artificially created emotion that is, if you don't know why it was created and you just kind of look at the emotion in itself, it would seem like the exact same thing as regular sadness. But the fact that you're sad because of a movie, it's like oh my god, what is it? Is it a different, what's the Aristotle word? Like different material cause, maybe? No, maybe that's not the word. Maybe a different efficient cause. One of the different causes.
Mm-hmm.
But the final cause is still the same.
Because Augustine goes in a bit of a different direction. He says that the reason we have these desires to go watch a scary movie or to make ourselves suffer in some type of ways because there's a dysregulation and a maybe misattribution of love, where we're trying to find an object to bestow these feelings unto that isn't God, and it's like a fault almost. We're like this like boiling pot, and whenever we watch a movie or anything, we're not turning the heat off. We're just like opening it up so steam can come out. We're not like solving the cause at its core. We're just like temporarily relieving it. That's why you feel relief in like one weird way when you're watching these horror movies, or you're getting to feel these feelings and let these things out. Not exactly because you've solved anything, but just because you're relieving it very temporarily. I think that's how he would answer, but I'm not him.
I mean,
That's
part of
kinda
it is
interesting.
probably self-regulating, you know? I don't think Augustine's wrong, really.
I don't either.
I don't know if this is related, but do you guys ever get it if you've like you haven't cried in like ages and ages and ages, and then you cry for some reason, and then afterwards you kind of feel like a weight has come off your shoulders? Because I get that sometimes. I don't know if that's kind of still on topic, but it's kind of you like kind of take the cap off something, I guess, and
That
that's
might
kind of
be,
you
yeah.
get this like satisfying relief feeling.
Yeah.
I haven't cried in 4 years.
It'd probably
Right.
feel fucking awesome if you finally do bawl your eyes out, John. Do it. Probably feel amazing.
I'd recommend it.
Well,
Yeah,
I
watch
I,
something really sad.
I don't see the reason behind crying, right?
Okay. Expand.
Expand.
Oh yeah. What specific action of crying releases makes you feel better? What is that action any different from any other action you might do? So, for example, like some people get angry, and as a result, they start punching things. But some people get angry and they use that energy for something productive.
I think because sadness is a fundamental human emotion that needs to
Is
be
ang-
expressed.
is anger not a basic
It is too,
fundamental?
but there's this thing called like masking where you can end up displaying an emotion that's actually hiding another emotion. This is very common.
Mm.
And I think sadness is one of these that can get masked pretty heavily. I think it's a very needed emotion. I think it's just basic like anger or fear or any of that.
Yeah, to
Do you
not
think that can come like very commonly in like the form of like projecting something?
Well, if you don't deal with it, you'll probably start projecting. I mean, that's kind of the definition when these unconscious thoughts and they become unconscious because you're not feeling them get projected onto other people.
yeah, to not cry or to not experience human emotions is almost like to negate your nature. This is
Right.
a chapstick.
And it's not like crying is useless. Like it serves a function.
Right. It has a purpose to it. There's a reason to feel
If you want to
better.
get like really basic, it gets rid of the stress hormones in your body through your tear ducts, but like
Yeah.
there's more to it than that as well. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to repress any emotions because usually those will get manifested in one way or another.
From a purely
Right.
biological
You
standpoint,
by nature.
from a purely biological standpoint, we need, or it's good to cry because it releases certain helpful hormones to regulate our nervous systems, right? It's just like when when you work out and then you have lactic acid buildup, right? A massage would do you good. You can go without it, but same thing with crying. A good cry would do your nervous system good. Good in the sense of like you know, cleaning up the synapses in your brain more or less
Right.
of certain areas.
Self-regulating.
Yeah.
Is it like relieving, or like, because I mean, it's kind of like that notion of, you know, some stress is good stress, right? That eustress notion. So like some crying is good crying, right?
Well, I mean, your hormones are literally out of balance usually when you need to cry. Usually, you're literally regulating your body. You know, too stressed out, and I mean, if anyone's ever dealt with, you know, acute stress or PTSD, they probably know exactly how that feels and know why it's useful.
Be a man, don't cry. You always hear that.
Yeah, just transform it into anger and then take it out on other people.
Yeah, I
It's really
got
simple.
fire coming out the top of my head, bro.
Drink 20 beers. Be a man.
Exactly. Then die from a stress-induced heart attack at 40.
Be a man.
I have never cried in my life.
Another part I do like about Augustine, I guess, like going back to the book a little bit, was his importance of friendship, quite honestly. Like how affected he was by this loss of his friend, because there was like a survey that went on, and people above the age of 35 or something like that don't even claim to have a best friend anymore. Which is quite sad. And in the ancient
Oh,
times,
sorry about that.
yeah, this importance on friendship, everything was like super friendship based. That doesn't It seems to exist less and less in our world. It seems like close buddy friendship.
I don't know if any of you have seen Arcane. It's a TV
I
show.
have.
Yes.
So Ego and I were talking about it, between the relationship of two characters. It was a character named Victor and a character named Jace. Now, in the show, they have there's definitely a love to it, right? There's an affection, but they're both scientists, and they both wish to improve the lives of people. No, I choose to view it as it's the love that unites them, right? It's a passion towards a common goal of caring for others. However, a lot of the fans who have watched it have viewed it in a more romantic light because I was against it, but Ego was kind of explaining why some would view it that way, and I agree with him. But I think it is due to people's difficulty understanding anything more than romantical love, right? I forgot the words for it, but it was a
Eros.
There we go. What was it, Philo? Or the
Philia.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it's like friendly love versus romantic love.
Friendly love, yeah.
Yeah, like the brotherly love, right? That's where Philadelphia comes from.
And then there's also agape, right? The divine love, or love for the divine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, philia is so important, I think. More important than Eros.
Oh, for sure.
Depends on who you ask, you know?
I think we should all kiss the homies goodnight sometimes.
Kiss the homies goodnight. Hell yeah.
For real. Yeah. I mean, we could get into like love. I mean, because that is part of Augustine's thing. Like, a lot of people don't, I don't know, they like assume love and sexuality. I mean, maybe they're one thing, but because, you know, sexuality is different when you're with someone you love versus like a hookup. But like, I don't know. I think a lot of people are in love with loving. I would say that, as Augustine said.
Infatuated with loving rather than love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're infatuated rather than in love. Like, for sure. And then he uses, I mean, Augustine replaces Eros with agape, pretty much, I think.
Yeah. He thinks that so long as you put your love in God, everything else can follow. You can have Eros after you've put your love in God. You can have philia after you've put your love in God. But so long as you put the love in God, then everything else can follow. But what he did that was inappropriate was put all his love in his friend. And then once the friend was removed, now he's left with nothing, and he's like fucked. he doesn't know what to do with himself because he put his love in the wrong place, basically. Because
Yeah, I mean, also Eros seems to be transformed when agape is put at the top. A lot of these types of love seem to be deepened or more meaningful.
yeah, yeah. Because also, like, if you put your love in God, something eternal, something infinite, then even if your friend dies, it's still the friend in a way is still infinite and it's still tied to God. It'll still be okay.
Now we're getting to Kierkegaard. With most fear and trembling, right? Didn't he mention the infinite resignation remembers their friend in the infinite or something?
Yeah, yeah.
I think
That's
so,
the
at
way I'm
least.
thinking about Augustine a little bit.
There's a lot of parallels there.
Hmm. At one point, he's going up. I think in book 4, he's going up to recite or to do this poetry or rhetoric or to speak on a stage, and then what's it called, like a witch basically, or like a shaman lady uh offers him, I'll do a couple of sacrifices to guarantee that you win. And he's very upset about that. He's like, no, of course not, that's so dumb. Like, you think you know what's gonna happen, like you're so proud of this type of knowledge that you claim to have, but it's not actually true. It's not going to do anything. It's funny because that's the exact same approach he takes with the Bible. He looks at it like this, like, really silly story for kids. He's not humbling himself. He says you need to bend your neck when reading the Bible, as in, like, you need to crouch down and, like, humble yourself, get smaller when you read the Bible.
Isn't it more so? I mean, if I remember correctly, doesn't he kind of say something along the lines of, and this doesn't negate what you're saying, but doesn't he kind of also say something along the lines of, like, if reading the Bible doesn't make you question your faith, then you're not actually reading the Bible?
I'm not sure if he says
I
that.
think he says that later, maybe. I don't exactly. I haven't.
Because he's very for the interpretationist view, right? Like, very for that. And that requires heavy contemplation of the Bible.
I think one of his most famous quotes is literally like, the Bible wasn't just written in pen and ink, like look above you, look below you. It's written all around in your
Right.
experience.
He had a lot of issues with the Old Testament, though. That I will say.
You did, or
No, he did. Augustine grappled with a lot of the issues in the Old Testament. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering.
I mean, Paul was kind of doing the same.
Yeah.
So
Let me see.
I mean, Cade, you can probably answer this question for me. Wasn't the Old Testament like a lot more violent than the new one?
you could say
Yeah.
that, although I would say crucifixion's pretty violent. But
I think
I mean, overall, right? Like,
there's a lot more wars. Like the Book of Judges, I think, or is it Kings? Where's the one where they keep switching judges? Maybe someone knows this, but like they have like a new judge, like over and over and over, and it's always through like violence. It's just like constant war. And I mean, the Old Testament kind of ends on a downer in some ways. Like things are going really bad, and we need a Messiah.
The way if I'm remembering, like, my course stuff correctly, the way he reconciled all of these problems, like, of, like, brutal sacrifices, adultery, just, like, raping, just, like, all the worst stuff that he could find in the Old Testament, every, like, little story, the way he, like, justified all that things is because he was looking at the Old Testament as if it were happening in modern day, or, like, during his time, when it would have been wrong. But the environment was completely different when the Old Testament was happening, so we can't judge those things the same way we would judge things
The Old
happening
Testament's
now.
like a history book for
Yeah.
the Israeli people, right?
Mhm.
Like specifically the Israeli Jews. It's basically a library, is what most people call it. The Bible isn't a book; it's a library. It's a collection. Because obviously there's like Ecclesiastes, which is completely different. Proverbs is just a list of proverbs, but a lot of it is just history. Like this guy was after this guy, who was after this guy, who prophesied this. The New Testament isn't really like that. It's more like teaching.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the Synoptic Gospels, all about Jesus, and then there's Paul's letters. There's book James, which was his brother. A lot of it is just like lessons. Like Paul is also rebuking the churches through half the New Testament.
You know what's interesting, and I forget if where in Augustine this is that he kind of says something that seemingly negates God's omnipotency. He's like, God cannot defy logic. Like, God can't make 2 + 2 = 5, which seems kind of against the idea of, you know, the regular Christian omnipotent being. And he even goes farther that, like, trying to handle like the problem of evil is that God doesn't necessarily have foreknowledge, even though he's omniscient, which kind of implies that God is a temporal being. Because he can't necessarily see evil coming, so he's not, like, the problem of evil has nothing to do with God. It was more so like he creates this idea of temporality within God and this idea of almost omnipotency. That seems to kind of question whether or not God actually is this absolute being, right? And I always thought that was against the entire Christian project.
Well, I think most Christians hold that like God can't do something contradictory, like self-contradictory. Like he can't make a stone that he can't lift because that wouldn't even make sense, right? That's just a logical contradiction.
Wait, what?
So I don't know. I think that's more of a common
the point
theme.
of omnipotency, right? Like he could make, like, well, wouldn't you think that he could change the places of like 4 and 5 to make 2 + 2 = 5 if he truly is this thing that has created and defines all abstract entities?
Maybe.
If it is like this creator God, why can you not control your creations almost?
I mean, we're kind of going
that
to
would
like
remove his
Plantinga
goodness.
argument a bit, or like what are we?
I think I have an answer.
Well, I mean,
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
if he were to be able to do these contradictions, he would be taking away from his perfect goodness, in which he created this world in perfect goodness, right? So if he does contradictory things in this world, then he's removing this benevolence that he bestowed onto it, the creation.
Also, I'm wondering too, like, what would motivate him to do that as well?
Yeah.
Even if he could, which I don't know. If we do want to follow that line though, because this is a really interesting topic, because people have thought about like, does God know if evil's going to happen or not? There's this concept called the God of the open future, where they see God as only knowing possibilities, but not what you'll choose.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting
Also,
idea that I played with.
On top of this problem of evil, right, a way that Augustine also answers it, he doesn't just say that, like, oh, God has no foreknowledge, so he doesn't see evil coming. He also kind of denies the existence of evil sometimes, right? He kind of says it's a matter of perspective. And no, not privation, but it's a matter of perspective, right? God isn't allowing evil to happen. What appears horrifying to us, to humans, is not actually evil to God, right? Evil is a human value rather than like something that is a, I guess, metaphysical value almost, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
That kind of just stops the conversation though. Like, because you can't really say much after that, right? Because it could or could not be true. We don't know.
Well, I could say something
Well, I mean,
after that. So
Yeah.
if you're taking the Augustinian position that nothing is that we as humans, we as mortals cannot deem things to be evil or not because we don't have the whole picture, right? That was one of his big points of like why bad things happen in the Old Testament. Because we don't have the full picture, so we can't make these like moral claims about it. We don't know enough. We don't have the you might see something that's wrong, like a bullying thing, but it's because it was justified or something like that. God has that view, we don't. But my point,
and also the idea that he transforms like bad into good as well.
Yeah, that things that appeared bad can actually end up being good in the future.
Right.
But my thing is that I don't know if I want to call or accept a God good if no matter which way he's like turning it and like molding it or looking at it, a burning house with dying kids inside is bad. That's bad. Like,
Right. It's
just
not satisfactory
period.
of an
Like,
argument.
yeah. Like whether or not one of those kids was gonna be a murderer later, that doesn't justify what like the evilness that happened there. I mean, I just look at something and like my immediate impression of whether or not that's good or bad, that's what matters when considering good and badness. I don't like that.
I mean, we could get into like the Plantinga argument too, and like the whole. That's how you say his name, right? I don't even know actually
Plantinga?
fully how to say his name.
Yeah, it
Alvin.
Plantinga.
So we could get into all that, but I do think. I mean, let's say we could even rationally say like this is possible. There's the emotional aspect to it, where like, even if it's logically possible for this to happen, is it really?
Yeah.
If we're got to be all good and to let this happen, is it really
That's a very low
how it
bar.
has to be? Yeah, is it really how it has to be?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just taking the Augustinian route, right? Like, I don't necessarily think, I don't think it's a good thing to say something like that, because at that point, somebody can live a horrendous life, one that I would never wish upon anyone. And I actually, like, I was talking to an evangelical Christian a while back, and they were saying, like they were taking a stance similar to this, where they said, oh, well, it might look evil to us if somebody was kind of abused and beat by someone for 30 years. God will see the good in it. We just can't see the good in it. I just don't see how in any circumstance that can be even remotely good. If
well,
that
people
person
will use
just,
it to justify abuse, for sure. They'll use it for many things like that. I don't really like Augustine's perspective either.
yeah, it's very problematic. But the thing is, like, we also need to keep in mind that for Augustine's time, there was nothing that was not God, right? God wasn't just a religion. God was a way of life almost, right? In the medieval period. And so any sort of denial about God was like, what was the word? It's like very impious, you know?
Hearsay or hearsay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very impious action, right? You can't just deny God in any sense, because, I mean, questioning God is like questioning living.
Yeah, I mean, many people have. I think Augustine might have been taken from the Kabbalah, if I remember correctly, the Kabbalah states that evil is a result of God not being there, like not being in an area. So I think he's kind of just taking from Jewish mysticism here.
Interesting.
But I don't even know if the Kabbalah was like really fully formed back then, though. I'll have to get a check on that. But they make the same argument as him.
I don't know any of Augustine's thoughts on the Jews, really. I can't imagine anything really, really nice, but maybe.
I think he was taking from. Obviously, I mean, Christianity is taken from Jewish mysticism to begin with, but I think he must have taken that point. I'll have to find a reference for that, because when I was going into the Kabbalah and different things, it just sounds like he's making an argument, a very Jewish mystic argument there. But I don't know. I don't find it convincing very much. I don't think you can boil all evil down to one solution. That's kind of like difficult to do. Like evil is just this.
But we also don't want to commit Occam's razor.
Cade, how do you solve
Right.
evil? Solve the problem of evil? Or what's the most like satisfying argument to you?
It's complicated. I don't know. I don't really fully want to get into it. I won't say I have a full answer though. A lot of my experience with Christianity, I will admit, like I grew up with it. I make certain assumptions. I think I have a certain disposition that allows me to intuitively see this in a completely different way. Like I would never even ask the question this way, if that makes sense. Like Christianity to me deals with what is here and now. It doesn't deal with possibilities if God is actually evil or this or that.
Mhm.
So it's like anything that I say is just me trying to figure it out. There's no real answer there. I don't know if that makes any sense. But
Kind of makes
I don't know.
sense.
The framing of the problem of evil is kind of weird to me. Because it's like, do you really? I hate to just, but like, do you guys really know the answer to the problem of evil, even if you're not a Christian? Like, why is there evil in the world?
My
I
most
mean, I don't
satisfying one.
necessarily think that it's too big of a. I don't think it's a hard question to really grapple with, because the problem of evil is more so a problem for Christians, more, or anyone who believes in a all good and all powerful God, because it contradicts that God at face value. So when you don't believe in a God, then it's not something you really need to grapple with. I mean, you can just say, obviously,
Yep.
not everyone's moral, right? Like, not everyone is the best person, and it sucks. But I don't have to answer it as tough as someone like someone like you who does believe in God.
Well, sure. I was about to say too. Like, this is kind of my issue. If you don't believe, it's. Well, I guess I can see why, because I think it has less to do with Christianity itself, but more the people who are excusing suffering and perpetuating it. I mean, personally, I come from an evangelical Christian family, and there was a lot of things that were not so human at all.
Yeah, I mean, you can just say, "Oh my God, well, God didn't stop me, so it's not bad." Like, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't sound right.
There's
If
a
that's
lot of things I say than just that. I mean, if you
well, right, but I'm just boiling it down to the most simple thing I can think off the top of my head.
Well, I mean, people even justify abandoning family members completely because they should know better type thing. There's a lot of stuff that goes on within certain
Yeah, it
Christian
sounds like
traditions.
the basic anti-homosexual argument.
Sure, like there's a lot. Yeah, that too. I mean, there's so many things that I think this problem is more with Christians too, right? I think Christians need to read the Bible more, in my opinion. Love your neighbor as yourself. In James, it says, "Who are you to judge your neighbor? When you judge your neighbor, judging God's law, and that's not your role. Like, who are you to do this?"
The most satisfying solution to the problem of evil, to my mind, is that a good God had to grant autonomy.
Right.
And
This
the
is kind of
autonomy
the
that people have is
platonic
what
argument
leads
of
to
it.
evil acts.
But I think that's also not satisfactory too, because of kids burning in a house, like
Natural evils.
cancer, like all these other things.
Yeah.
Right. Because the problem of evil isn't really about, oh, the suffering I go through every day. I think it's more about these, very out of control tragedies of humankind. Because if we were to exempt, like stuff like that, then I would say, well, the point of life isn't just to seek pleasure all the time. There's going to be suffering, and suffering is part of growing.
Mhm.
It isn't as simple as, well, why can't we just be happy all the time? I don't think that would be a very interesting life.
Yeah.
But then if we add back in, kids dying of like cancer and stuff, then it gets really
excessive or
messy. Then
yeah.
then that answer doesn't make sense anymore. I don't even think.
Yeah, excessive or like nonsensical, like a paper cut type of pain or suffering. It's like that. How is that
Right.
helping to my moral development to the person?
And the traditional Christian view would be this is just a product of sin, basically, like a series of sins led up to this happening. But I still I don't know. I care a lot more, I think, about people, and I don't really like those answers very much. I do think that Christians should, not really blame, because I know a lot of Christians victim blame,
Mhm.
and we should be focusing more on how to solve these issues rather than just saying, well, God will handle it. God will deal with it,
Another way I think
Christians use
Sorry, go for it.
I think that a lot of Christians kind of use the God of the gaps, right, in order to fill in anything that they might not understand.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, God of the Gaps is a big, big thing.
Yeah, especially in like evangelicals.
Well, evangelicals, yeah, dude. Evangelicals typically don't even believe in like evolution or any of that stuff either. So they're
Yeah.
a good group to
A
pick
really
on.
good way to put it. I've never heard it put like that.
It's almost like a plot device, right? It's like the Christians view God as oh, it has to happen because it has to, right?
Well, they're almost like determinists in that way, which is really weird.
Yeah.
They're almost like the Calvinists.
And what are the Calvinists?
They are the determinists of
Determinists,
Christianity.
yeah.
They don't believe in free will. They believe that everyone has already been chosen to go to heaven, so everything's predestined. It's called predestination.
Yeah, I don't know how Augustine doesn't believe in determinism. I mean, I've read his on like the choice and on free will or whatever, but it to me just sounds like you're a determinist too. At the end of the book, just kind of says, "But free will exists."
The Bible actually can get really messy if you look at it from that way, because then you can take like in the Bible the fall of Lucifer, right? Well, did God intend that to happen? Did Lucifer have any free will, or even Judas, right? If the crucifixion had to happen, did God force Judas to do it? And if so, can he really be blamed for his own actions?
Right. And this is the typical Calvinist argument too that you're laying out.
Yeah. So if you think about it, Judas actually wasn't that bad. He was just filling his part.
You could also have a Gnostic interpretation of that too. There's a Gospel of Judas, which is quite the trip to read.
I mean, that just sounds crazy to say that a murderer didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But don't
It
the
kind of
Calvinists
exempts
also
It has
everyone.
nothing to do with like Jesus and Judas. You know what I mean? It's more so like a murderer in itself didn't do something that is in itself bad. Is just a crazy
But they should still be
interpretation.
punished.
This is partly why I don't like them. Yeah, this is partly why I don't like the Calvinists, because they're like, they can justify murder that way.
No, but they
Like,
still
Like,
think
yeah,
that
he
the,
murdered someone, but it was part of the divine plan.
they
Like,
still
again,
think that the murderer should be punished, though.
right.
Yeah.
So, do you guys believe that there's a difference between murder and killing?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, murder is a different. Like we have 3 degrees of murder for that reason.
Right.
Intentionality.
Yeah, I'd say there's a difference.
I mean, just manslaughter too. Are you saying Jesus committed manslaughter?
What?
Accidentally kill someone.
Well, from my understanding of the Bible, a lot of it is in the context of a lot of the other groups that the Jews slaughtered were heretics, right? So a good example is like what was it, Molus or Baal, which I don't know if you might be familiar with, but it's essentially a god that many people worship. And the way you worship it was by sacrificing your child and burning them alive. And then I guess he would give you like good crops or something, which is then reflected in something like Abraham, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Abraham and Isaac, where he had to sacrifice him. Because when it starts, it seems like that, right? It seems like he's going to sacrifice his son in order to gain something, or just because God wants him to.
Kate, are you familiar?
Of course. I mean, this is the parallel story to Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
God
Yeah,
sacrificed his own son. It's a parallel.
Yeah, so it's supposed to like show like the contrast of it. Like it's almost like a gotcha, right? It's a plot twist in the Bible.
Yeah. But like we could go like over this, I feel like forever and never really reach a conclusion, you know?
Yeah.
This can go on and on. There's so many interpretations.
I think it's really important to point out that Jesus killed a fig tree because it didn't have any figs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did Kierkegaard have any writings on Augustine?
He'd never really explicitly, I think he was definitely influenced, but he never really talks about him much. He never really talks about any of the any theologians much. Although his is I think it's somewhat in line with Augustine. Obviously, Kierkegaard was a Lutheran, so that's a bit different.
What are Lutherans differing?
Well, for one thing, I mean, Lutheranism came from Martin Luther.
Well, yeah, but why do they think different?
He's separated from the Protestants,
There's
no?
many things. Well, there's so many things. Like we could talk about the saints. We could talk about the sacraments. We could talk about a lot of stuff. The interpretation of the law versus the gospel.
Do you believe in saints?
I believe everyone is a saint, like Jesus said in the Bible. He said all Christians are saints.
All
Right.
Christians, not everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, not everyone. You have to be one of
Yes,
those.
my bad. All Christians are saints.
Ouch.
I have a hard time with like the sainthood stuff. I do
Yeah.
understand that, like, if I might remember correctly, these saints, they also kind of like live within the church. And so that's why you're like able to ask them to pray for you. They're kind of, it's a very communal type thing. But I guess I haven't read the Catholic books. I've read the Book of Wisdom. It's hard for me to accept the idea of sanctification, but
Why?
I don't know. I could be convinced. I just don't think it matches. I think when Jesus said every Christian is a saint, I think he meant it. I don't think it was very ambiguous.
Okay.
I don't think only certain people can be sanctified for performing miracles. That's a very Protestant view. And obviously that doesn't align with the Catholics or the Orthodoxy or any of the other Catholic sects, like, Oriental Orthodox and whatever.
Okay.
Mr. John Doe, are you a Catholic? Is this why you're asking?
No, I am religious, but just like you, I'm a free agent. Yeah.
You're on the market. You're on the market.
Yeah, I'm just waiting until we get close enough to pick a side.
Yeah, number one line pick next season, huh?
Yeah.
I don't think that's really going to happen, but one can dream.
Yeah, the Bible gets really weird, especially at the end where you have locusts with the faces of people.
The Whore of Babylon, the Leviathan, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
When's,
gonna
the
rock and
Katie
roll
stuff?
because I gotta go eat. But thanks very much for coming and chatting, Augustine. I'm gonna end the recording here too. I'll catch you guys next week or just like in the chat or anything like that. But yeah, I'm out. Bye, friends.
Bye.
Yeah, be safe.